Hello, true crimers! I'm here! My two favourite things is true crime and my makeup products. And I've tried to morph them together, but unfortunately it's just not for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing my true crime stories, and I'm also going to upload my makeup tutorials. And then you get both a mix on the channel, and I think that's quite fresh and nice. And that's how I want to go forwards with it. And I think therefore you've got a choice. You know, you don't have to get the makeup thrust in your face if you don't want to. And you can have the true crime separate. And we can just focus on having a little drink. And I think that's more sensible. Geez, today's story is a lot to cover. And this guy was prolific in his schemes and manipulation to do just about anything to try and escape. Ted's mother, Elena Louise Cowell, she was in fact known as Louise. She gave birth to Theodore, aged 22 years old. She was unmarried. Now, Louise gave birth to a baby boy on the 24th of November, 1946. And she delivered her baby and called him Theodore Robert. Now, this was in a home for unwed mothers in Vermont. She then took the baby boy back to her parents in Philadelphia. Now, there were many possible theories as to who indeed the biological father was. One guy was called Lloyd Marshall, who was an Air Force veteran and Penn State graduate. Others stated it was a chap called Jack Worthington, but the most creepy ass indeed was, in fact, his grandfather could possibly have also been his father. Just gonna have a little drink there. Now, on the birth certificate, it's only Ted's mother that was actually stated on there, and no father was recorded. I think it's fair to say it was highly unlikely a father would ever come forward and claim this nut as his long-lost son. Yeah, I'm all right, thanks. So Elena, or Louise as she preferred, well, she was raised in a super strict religious household. And she was living back at home, aged 22, with a newborn baby and was unmarried. Which to me is no biggie. You know, have your baby, love your life, be happy as you can possibly be. But back in the day, that was an absolute no-no. You just did not dare bring this shame to your family. It was seen as absolute scandal. Now, Louise's mummy and daddy had a bit of a plan. They were like, bring the baby home. We'll say we adopted it. Now, Louise, listen, you're going to be the sister, and me and dad, well, we're going to be mum and dad to the baby. So call your brother, okay, let's go to church. Everybody move, church, here we go. So this was all going really well. And Louise was, you know, hi brother, how are you? It's great. And then she just turns around, she's like, right, Ted, we're moving to Tacoma. We're going in a week. I'm going to be called Mummy. But, you're my sister. No, call me Mummy. Get your stuff, we're going. So Louise moves to Tacoma with Ted, and she's now Mummy and he's son. Now in 1951, Louise marries this guy called Johnny Bundy. Yes, this is where it all begins. Ted takes the name and becomes Ted Bundy. Now, although he had the name of his stepdad, Ted adamantly did not approve of him being with his mum. It was documented that Ted looked down at his dad and saw him as beneath Ted. He was completely embarrassed of his stepdad's lack of education and working class roots. Oh my God, Mum, it's so degrading to my image. I mean, I am the Lord Ted Bundy. You know, I'm going to be president when I'm grown. Chin chin. Now, Ted, as a youngster, had a rather interesting little hobby. He would love to play with knives. I mean, he was mesmerised by knives. He would sit and stare at their serrated edges of the blade and line them up like little toy trucks. How lovely. Honey, where's the kid? Oh, he's just in the bed playing with knives. My son, Bundy, he's going to be president. I can see it. Now, Ted was actually really super bright at school, and he later stated in one of his many interviews that it was like, well, he was pretty much like the all-American blue-eyed boy. Once Ted hit puberty, he would head off and peer into young girls' bedroom windows and watch them get undressed. What a little shit. He really enjoyed going out at night and stalking these girls. Once Ted started uni in Washington, he met a beautiful, stunning young lady from California. California. Sorry. This beauty had long brown hair that was parted in the middle, and Ted was completely besotted with her. To Ted, she had everything he could ever have dreamt of. She was classy, her family background meant she had social influence and money. This all aroused the narc and idealistic belief Ted felt he rightly deserved. So Ted heads off to graduate from uni, and soon after, all was going so well, his dream is happening, he has his prize woman who wants only him, and boom, she ends the relationship. Ted was absolutely devastated. How could this filly not want me, the Ted Bundy? How dare she reject Armando me? Now, ladies and gents, just want to say, just because somebody's handsome does not mean they are okay. It does not give a righteous path. Please, murderers don't have warts on their faces and green eyes and claws. We need to remove that facade. Now, as I'm saying, Ted had a degree in psychological behaviours that are accepted in society. I would say Ted was a bit of a clever little shit. Sadly, this also was the demise when luring poor innocent girls into his car. Now, do you remember the scene from Silence of the Lambs when the creepy serial killer is ramming a huge giant sofa into his car? And he's got like a sling and a pot on his arm, and he looks so vulnerable and he needs help, and the girl goes over and helps him. Remember it? Well, yes, that is taken from the case files from Ted Bundy. And this is entirely what the freaky little shit would do. He would lure these beautiful girls to their death, and these girls were choosing to go over and help this absolute cruel, twisted little shit, and for their thanks, they were murdered. So, after a lot of dramatic play, which Ted was good at, Ted enjoyed watching the police and the courts continue to prove his guilt. But Ted would finally confess to 36 killings of young women across several states in the 1970s. Detectives now believe this figure to be more in the range of over 100 souls taken. Ted's killing routine would be to lure these girls to his car, handcuff, rape and beat them savagely to death. The time Ted started his killing spree was possibly around 1974, but there was some synergy of a lot of young women going missing in the Oregon and Seattle area, so detectives are working hard to correlate all this information to identify when Ted actually started his murders. Now, I found as young as 14 years of age could have possibly when Ted started, as a little girl went missing in his home patch, and the father of the child documented that Ted was actually seen at the murder site, which also had a muddy teenage footprint left behind as evidence, but sadly the body was never found. Now, Ted would confess in an interview that there were many murders that he just could not ever talk about. They were just too close to home. The victims were far too young, and it may have involved family. Now, once Ted had finished with his now murdered victim, he would just dump them. But then he would regularly return to have sex with the mutilated corpse, and would just keep going and doing this until it was no longer possible due to the bodies decomposing or wild animals getting at their remains. Ted decapitated 12 of his victims. Now, all these victims were the double of his first love from California, who he rejected. Ted kept these heads in his apartment. Now, this is very similar to Dahmer if you watch my first video. It's sort of like a trophy or a sexual kick, so they can relive everything that they've done and keep some sort of item with them. So these are the chronological murders that were documented. But don't be fooled, this is just a snippet, and the sad reality is we will never know all who lost their lives to this complete arsehole of a horrendous human being, if that's what you could call him. February 1st, 1974, a young woman. She was stabbed while sleeping and abducted. Her jaw and skull were found at Taylor Mountain in California. March 12th, 1974, a 19-year-old abducted, body dumped at Taylor Mountain again, and she was en route to a concert. Remains never found. April 17th, 1974, 18-year-old went missing from a college meeting in Washington, skull and jawbone found in Taylor Mountain. May 6th, 1974, 22-year-old goes missing from Oregon Uni, skull found at Taylor Mountain. June the 1st, 1974, 22-year-old, she left a bar and was never seen again. Skull found, Taylor Mountain. June 11th, 1974, 18-year-old abducted from behind her uni dorm. Ted gave an in-depth detail of this girl and her remains were found in Issaquah. Issaquah? Not sure. How considerate of you, Ted. July 14th, 1974, 23-year-old abducted from Lake Sammamish. Now, he was getting cocky at this point, and this was in broad daylight, and witnesses stated they saw the girl leave with a dark-haired, handsome chap with a distinctive car, a VW Beetle. July 14th, 1974, this girl was taken 4 hours after the first abduction. She was in Issaquah. Also, autumn 1974. Now, Ted moved up to Utah for law school, but remember Liz, his 9-year relationship? Well, she rightly had some suspicions, and right before Ted conveniently sods off to Utah, well, there were sketches that have been drawn of this predator starting to circulate the community. And hey-ho, it just looks like Ted fucking Bundy. So Ted's pretty much shitting himself at this moment. He's like, I'm going to go away. I'm going to move over to uni and start again. You know, uproot, relocate, settle in Seattle with his super charm, and he'll just be a pillar of the community. Nice. Now, as soon as Ted moved, coincidentally, women started disappearing. So Ted is attending uni, surrounded by beautiful young women, and is on a complete rampage. I mean, how the hell does he fit all this shit in? How? So Utah, Colorado and Idaho, there were 9 victims that were murdered by Ted. In Florida, there are another 3. And as for the suspected other murders, well, there is a shit ton. It's just endless. October 2nd, 1974, 16-year-old was taken, raped and strangled. This was in Utah. But Ted was adamant he put her at Capitol Reef National Park, but the body was never found. 17-year-old taken from walking home from school, again in Utah. Oh, Jesus. Only her kneecap was found, but it's still to be confirmed as actually her remains. June 28th, 1975, 15-year-old girl taken after a youth conference. Ted said he put her near Prince, which is just around near Utah. It was just a maze of absolute disturbing proportions. I mean, the only reason they could patch up who was put where was indeed due to Ted and his want of the centre stage and spotlight. But in my opinion, the only reason Ted complied and worked with detectives in the end was to delay his just desserts. So we're still in 1974, and Liz, his long-standing flame, well, she still has her flapping and concerns about Ted. You know, that woman intuition, that witchy vibe, that you get that instinct and it's right deep in your soul. It's just like a flutter, an instinct. And she had just that. And good old Liz, well, she did a bit of raking and rummaging in his shit. And please be assured, those girls were good at doing a bit of raking. So Liz goes through his shirts, his trousers, his jackets, then pulls out all the drawers of his office, and she finds a fucking meat cleaver. Just okay. I remember Ted saying he was taking a butchery. I'll just put Ted, can I just have a chat with you? I mean, I've just been tidying up and I just found a meat cleaver in your office drawers. Are you taking up butchery courses? Well, you see here, little filly, that is for a lord to file his big toe. Because that's what we do as lords. We file our big toe with a meat cleaver. Good. Okay, good luck with that then. I'll just be outside putting my foot down in the car and leaving. Now, despite Ted's shoddy effort to laugh it off as nothing, good old Liz picked up the phone and called the police. In fact, she called on several occasions in confidence, stating that the sketches that they were circulating looked just like Ted. And the car, they were also stating he owned one. Unfortunately, the police never acted on this info and Liz stayed with Ted, but they remained very distant. And moving forward in 1975, Liz yet again went to the police, and this time with enough evidence to arrest Ted. Now, Ted tried to escape police, but thank God he was arrested. Now, Ted would later state that his love for Liz was very destabilising for him, as he loved her far too much. Ted would later have a prison phone call with Liz and tell her that he had on many occasions tried to kill her and his sickness was building inside him. Now, she left that call knowing it was time to rebuild her life, and as far as she was concerned, this compulsive liar being arrested was now valid. Good on you, Liz. Well done. Liz later went on to write a book called The Phantom Prince, My Life with Ted Bundy. The actual arrest was on August the 16th, 1975, when Ted failed to stop for a traffic standstill. An officer of Utah Highway Patrol in Salt Lake City, well, he felt something was rather shady about Ted, so he proceeded to the car. He asked Ted to step out of the vehicle. What's the hurry, sir? Why did you fail to stop? He stated he peered into the car and it was just utterly bare-assed. I mean, there was nothing in it apart from Ted's chair. Whilst Ted steps aside, the officer looks through the boot and he finds a murder kit. Oh, I know, you're thinking, Hannah, what the hell is a murder kit? Well, let me tell you. This dude had a mask made from black ladies' tights, a ski mask, ice pick, rope, handcuffs, a crowbar, and a black bin bag. Black bin bag. Obviously being very eco, Ted, and keeping tidy. So thankfully this copper is using his noggin and has major red flags. All is not right here. All is not right. So what the hell are you going to do with all this then? What were you going to do with this, Ted? Ted usually has a campaign speech for every occasion, but finally lost his voice. Stuttering quietly, he proceeded to be calm and say, oh, they're just everyday, normal bits and bobs. I was just move them over to my new apartment. Now, this copper knew of the description of circulating of the suspect connected to missing women, and the car also matched. The copper grabs Ted and arrests him. Now, when they went through Ted's apartment and did a thorough search, they unfortunately found nothing, so Ted was sent on his way. God, this guy is just unreal. Police kept a 24-hour surveillance on Ted. Now, I hear your cries of disgust at this point, thinking, really? They have just let this guy out? Oh my God. But in this day and age, it was very, very difficult to obtain all the evidence needed, and they needed to compile enough to get him hook, line and sinker. So while police are investigating and keeping close tabs on Ted, they get back in touch with Liz, and she's still living in Seattle while Ted did his mad dash to Utah to supposedly start a degree in law. I hope you're studying hard, Ted. Nothing here, officer. Nothing here. Now, good old Liz had continued her digging on him, had indeed found, well, you remember the meat cleaver? Yeah. Well, she also found a plaster of Paris kit, crutches, surgical gloves, a sack of women's clothing, and to put this with the meat cleaver, well, you have pretty much got a fucking serial killer, haven't you? Liz also told detectives that Ted was always in debt and never ever had any money. He never had a pence to his name, but somehow always managed to have the latest stuff. Liz told detectives that she had finally had enough of all this new shit piling up in her house, while Ted could never produce a penny to his name. Ted, I just don't understand where you get all this shit from. It's so expensive. I mean, you just don't have a pot to piss in, and you have all the latest gear. And I kid you not, Ted Bundy was disgusted. How dare you, mere filly, question I, Theodore Twattington Bundy? Ted turned to Liz very calmly and said, "If you dare tell anyone, I will break your fucking neck." End quote. Now, Liz was very honest with her suspicions and what he had said in the past, but she really had no clue to the reality of what was sleeping beside her. Ted had actually sold the VW Beetle at this point, and he thankfully sold it to a young chap at a uni, and he paid for it and had done nothing with it. So it was wonderful when the police retrieved it back as evidence and were able to find, under forensic screening, hairs that matched 3 women. Now, 2 of these women were missing and 1 was still alive. In fact, this victim had survived and escaped Ted's clutches. Ted was placed behind a screen and it was a lineup with other men. Now, this victim had to hopefully point out Ted as the man that tried to abduct and potentially kill her. Now, she did just that. "That's him! That's the freak who grabbed me. He said he was Officer Roseland. He was going to kill me." Ted was charged with aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault, and then was let out on bail. That is a really good message. Good message. Yeah, really, really clear, that one, yeah. Off you go, Ted. Good luck with that. So Ted's out doing Ted shit, and police have him back in to interview him in February 1976. Finally, for the victim who he was arrested for and was found guilty. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison on June 30th, 1976. Yes! Remember, this is just for the victim who escaped. So all is finally going in the right direction for justice, at least. So we have this fruit and nut bar behind bars and, well, Ted escapes. Yes, I kid you not, he gets out. But thankfully, he was found not far from the prison in some bushes. What a twonk. So they sent Ted to solitary confinement, which, if this guy wasn't already deranged enough, let's just say after this stint he probably was mentally warped for good. Yeah, solitary confinement would pretty much fuck you up for life. Now, in the same month of making a run for it to a bush, he was also being charged with the murder of a young woman in Aspen. Ted was transferred for the trial, and of course this was his moment of final glory. So he decided to stand trial and represent himself. Clever Ted. I mean, who else could stand trial for him and speak better than Ted? No way, this was his creation and he wanted all the glory for it. Now, representing himself was not only meant this nut would be exempt from being handcuffed and shackled, but also he would get full legal fair trial, enabling him to access the court's library. So Ted asked to visit the library. He seats himself down with a book while casing the joint, working out how many guards and potential escape routes are available. Now, the library window is wide open, and to Ted's delight, the guard then steps away to speak to a fellow guard. Ted heads straight to the window and has his ass out of that window faster than a robber's dog. So Ted is out on foot and making a run for it, and he manages to stay unfound for 8 days. This was not the only escape. He has also escaped prison cells. And to escape custody, he managed to cut a hole through the ceiling and drop 2 stone in weight to fit his bony ass through this hole in the ceiling wall. Now, he would get up into this hole and survey his surroundings to find the best way out while leaving his bed piled up with books and had a throw placed over to look as though Ted was indeed in bed. Now, it's December 30th, 1977, and Ted is busy piling up his books on his bed. And the guards walk past the cell and are satisfied that Ted is fast off, while actually the reality was that Ted was in fact making his way to the chief jailer's apartment. Yet again, the luck was on his side, as no one was there in the room, and Ted managed to get changed into the jailer's clothes, clip on his security badge, and he just walked through the fucking front door and left. It gets worse. The guards failed to notify his escape, and it was not until 15 hours later that he was alerted as missing. Now, a brutal attack had happened in January 15th, 1978. It was Florida State, and a break-in had happened in a unidorm at around 2:45 a.m. This girl had been attacked with a piece of firewood. The girl was asleep in her bedroom. She was strangled with a pair of nylon black tights until she was dead. He then proceeded to the girls asleep in the next room. She was a 20-year-old. Ted brutally beat her until she was unconscious and then strangled her with the tights. He savagely bit off one of her nipples. He then sank his teeth into her bottom, leaving a deep imprinted teeth mark in the skin. He then proceeded to sexually assault her with a glass bottle. While Ted is feeling like king of the rock and all supreme, he fails to realise the error of somewhat the catalyst in connecting him to so many poor girls' murders. Now that bite was so severe, it left behind the unique teeth imprint that would later prove this pure evil's connection. Ted went to a further 2 girls that were sleeping. He broke the jaw of one of the girls and her shoulder was literally hanging off the bone. The other girls received a broken jaw, a broken finger, and some of her teeth were knocked out. This series of brutal attacks all happened in just a space of 15 minutes. But Ted wasn't finished just yet. He headed up to a separate dorm and attacked another girl. She had a dislocated shoulder, a broken jaw, her skull was fractured in 5 different places, and she was left permanently deaf. February 9th, Ted kidnapped and brutally murdered a 12-year-old little girl, and then fled the scene. In February 15th, Ted was pulled over by police. He was in a stolen car, and police could see on the data that this car was stolen and proceeded with caution. "Step out of the vehicle and put your hands above your head." As soon as Ted stepped out, he was in no way ready to give up. He booted this copper as hard as he could in the leg and made a run for it. He was just off. Copper shot 2 firing shots, but it was no good. He needed to get on foot and get Ted, and off he ran. He tackled Ted to the ground and it was a brawl. Ted was not planning on giving up just yet, but thankfully he got Ted in handcuffs and chucked him in the van. I mean, personally I would have tasered the fucker about 16 times and gone, "Oh, sorry about that, where my gun keeps going off. Sorry." Not sorry, little fucker. The copper proceeded to Ted's stolen car and found 3 sets of ID which were from the girls in Florida, and 21 credit cards. And yes, a random fucking TV. I mean, you are a fruit nut bar, boy. So Ted is now in prison yet again. And in February 1980, there was a woman that Ted had previously worked with and dated while working for the emergency services hotline. Oh, that's so fitting of Ted. Carol was a mother of 2 and was a huge supporter of Ted being innocent. Oh boy. Ted loved this and felt like the crusader, a politician pledging his counsel. Now Ted stood at the court and proceeded to propose to Carol. Now, being in front of a judge in Florida, that would make this marriage indeed legit. And of course Carol said, "I do, Ted, I do." So they were both now married, and Ted was yet again centre stage running his circle that he has created. Carol becomes pregnant with Ted's child, and they have a daughter in 1982 called Rose. Ted was even on the birth certificate as the father. We don't know much about Rose, and I think it's fair to say that, in my opinion, and on my channel, I don't want to dig, because I think she's a very innocent little soul and had nothing to do with this and deserves a happy life. So for me, I don't want to go there. So Carol's on her campaign of supporting Ted and being the wonderful wife that she was for him in these circumstances, and then she came to the conclusion that Actually, Ted, you are just a little bit of a fucking shit. And you did do all this to these girls. You absolute douche. I'm done. I want a divorce. I'm never speaking to you again. Good on you, Carol. So Carol divorced Ted 3 years before his execution. She later would write a book called The Stranger Beside Me. Carol would cut all ties with Ted for good. Good on you. He's a freak. Done. Now, Ted is back in court for the murders and assault that had taken place while he had escaped, and this was at the uni dorms. The trial was huge and covered by 250 reporters from 5 different states. The all-American blue-eyed boy is now centre stage for the final crescendo. Are you all watching? I hear you cry. Ted was sentenced to death by the electric chair, but this would drag out for 9 years, mostly due to the fact that Ted kept dangling a carrot to detectives on new whereabouts of murders they were yet to solve. So once again, Ted had played all his cards to the detectives, and now they had no more interest in what he had to say. So Ted was put to the electric chair on January 24th, 1989. He was 42 years old. Now, there were huge celebrations outside of the prison once it was announced Ted was officially dead. People came out with t-shirts with quotes. There were banners, there were flags, there were fireworks, there were sparklers. People were euphoric. Hooray! He's gone! They were just happy he was not on the planet. And I'm not sure I'm keen on the whole death penalty situation, but I understand. You know, this was horrendous. This was a horror story for real. Ted was cremated in Gainesville, and his ashes were scattered somewhere in Washington. Ted is still the main suspect in several murders. He most certainly is responsible for even more than that. Ted had a conversation in 1987 and confided to a country detective that there were some murders that he would never talk about as they were too close to home, too close to family, or involved family. He did state that it was victims that were very, very young of age. Now, Ted's DNA profile was added to the FBI database in 2011 for future reference. Ted's 1968 VW Beetle car was displayed in the National Museum of Crime and Punishment, which is in Washington, D.C. It now resides at the Alcatraz East Crime Museum in Tennessee. There is so much to this horror story, and I hope I covered as much as I could in order to make some sort of sense of the unfortunate events. If you are wanting to continue on digging on this true crime, then there is a stack of options, from docuseries, audio, podcasts, or just the good old-fashioned hard book. Now, I just want to end today by just saying a humongous, from my heart and soul, thank you for everybody's love and support. This channel means so much to me. It really does. And I can't continue to do this without you guys. So I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if you've got any comments, please put them below. I'm going to respond. And I know I've said that I'm going to do my makeup. I'm going to do a separate makeup video that I upload. And then we can keep 2 separate, but sort of get a fix 2 on 1 channel if you like. Now, my glass is burned dry and I won't have it because I need a little top up and I'm off to go and watch a bit more true crime. You know me, I'm always at home.